What is it about the life of a Grand Prix mechanic that's sort of so fascinating to read about, do you think?
Well, I think part of the sort of interest is that, as you said, nobody really gets to hear about what they do, and nobody gets to hear their side of the story. You know, without wishing to belittle in any way the work that modern day mechanics do, the mechanics who worked in Formula One in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, they had a very different job to mechanics, nowadays. And for example, they used to build the cars during the winter. Then they would go and test them before the season started, and then when the races come, they would load them up onto the back of the transporter. They then drive the transporter all the way across Europe to wherever they were going, stay in some local car dealer, and probably a fairly modest pension or bed and breakfast, and then they would work all weekend on these cars. If they got crashed, they'd rebuild them with whatever materials they had. They were real artisans, if you like, in that they would use their skills to rebuild the chassis or the engine or the gearbox, whatever needed doing. And then at the end of the weekend they drive the cars back, prepare them for the next race and so on, and it was just a continuous cycle. That's what I wanted to do, was to go and talk to them. And they've given me access to their personal photo albums and scrapbooks, and I've tried to pick out photographs that I think people won't have seen, or that show something a little bit unusual, because everybody's seen pictures of Jim Clark driving a Lotus 25 on track, or Ronnie Peterson, or all these classic drivers. It's a sort of dip in, dip out book. It's not meant to be read in one sitting, although no reason why somebody shouldn't do that. But it's grouped into very distinct chapters with different themes, and it comprises a large number of shorter stories. So it is something that you can pick up and put down. The emphasis of the book is on humour, but I've tried to, where it's relevant, I've tried to introduce sort of, some poignancy as well, because the mechanics got very close to the drivers that they worked with, and very often they were the last people to speak to them before they went out down the pit lane, and obviously it was very upsetting for them in those days when a lot of drivers did die on the racetrack. It was very upsetting for the mechanics, and it was very hard for them to deal with. Not just that, but also the fact that they may have worked on the car, or the piece of the car that maybe a piece broke or something like that. So it weighed very heavily on them, the sort of responsibility of having someone else's life in their hands by the quality of the work that they did. Yes, I mean, one of the chapters, talks about the fact that really it was like one big happy family. There's a photo that's in the book that shows every single mechanic on every single Formula One team at the Mexican Grand Prix in 1964, I think it is, and there's about 26 guys there. Now, nowadays you would have more than 26 guys in one garage for one team. So it has moved on tremendously. You can't really imagine Ferrari sort of helping McLaren finish an engine change now, can you? So it's just a very different life, and they were really genuinely very close friends, and they used to socialise, and part of it was that there used to be more of a social scene around Formula One in those days, because it wasn't as serious. The mechanics that I've interviewed started around about I think the earliest one was about 1954, something like that. So covering the era of people like Fangio and Sterling Moss and the Van Walls and the early parts of the BRM project, and then right through the 1960s, when British teams like Lotus and so on came very much to the fore. And there are some quotes into the 1980s, but the bulk of it is sort of 50s, 60s, 70s, and I would say most of the stories are probably from the 60s and early 70s. People like Tony Robinson spend a long time working with Al Francis, with Sterling Moss, and they obviously seem to get on quite well. And in the sort of more recent era, there was a chap called Keith Layton who was sort of known as Ronnie Peterson's mechanic, and so he moved more or less wherever Ronnie went. But one of the things that came out from my research was that the mechanics didn't want to get too close to the drivers, because in an era where drivers were getting killed so often, it was a defence mechanism on their part not to get too close to them, because several of them had done so and had lost a driver and had been very hurt by it, very upset by it, and had vowed, to step back from then onwards and not get that close to a driver, which was probably pretty smart, because the cars in those days weren't as strong as they are now, and the circuits weren't as safe, and that was one of the things that Jackie Stewart did, was campaign tirelessly for circuits to be made safer. Jackie founded an organisation called the Grand Prix Mechanics Charitable Trust in 1987, and put simply, the objective of the trust is to make sure that no mechanic goes without if they're not able to support themselves from their own resources. For example, if they need an operation, or they need some care if they're sick, or that sort of thing, and the trust is there to sort of as a safety net, really. And Jackie founded this in the late 1980s, as I say, and has tirelessly sort of campaigned to keep it in the public eye. So I asked Jackie, because he seemed to be an obvious person to write it, and the book, each copy of the book sold, the trust actually benefits from each copy that's sold. So there's a nice tie in there, and so I'm really grateful that he's decided to write the foreword for it. I think there are things that little things that people won't know about, won't have heard. Well, at least I hope they won't have heard. Anyway, I mean, I don't want to give too much away, but no, there will be things in there that people go, oh God, I didn't realise that, or I never knew that. Well, I hope so. That's the aim, is to tell the reader something that they didn't know, whilst amusing them.